Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Dear Holmes. It's Sunday, November 24th, 2024. I always feel weird when I see these YouTubers who have their catchphrase every video, hello and welcome back, or whatever their thing is. And I can see the appeal of it. It's sort of, it's once you remember it, it gets you into the flow. You don't have to try to remember what to say. But I think it's like a rut. So I try to avoid getting into that rut. You are watching Co-op for Two, broadcasting live from Champaign, Illinois. Today we are playing a case called The Poison Pen. This is the second episode of it. And before we get started and recap, let's check in with the chat. Let's hear what everyone is doing for Thanksgiving coming up, if you celebrate Thanksgiving. I am very thankful for this channel and for those of you at home who join me for these playthroughs. It's been a real surprise to me, a shock, how much I enjoy playing these games with you all. And when I first started doing this YouTube channel, which was 4 years ago, I remember recording a review and us saying, you know, thank you for watching the channel. I remember thinking, why am I thanking the viewers for watching this review I've just recorded? They should be thanking me. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't a million reviewers, but what am I getting out of this that I'm thanking you for it? But I completely get it now. It is a real joy to share these times with you and to have these games that we can discuss and think about. And we've played some really fun games recently on the channel. We played a new small box Guilty Monaco 1955 that's behind me over there at the far end. Took us 12 hours to play through that, and then we really had some good discussions about that. And then last night, no, not last night, Friday night, we played the latest Cryptic Killers game called Murder on Mount Mortimer, which was a ton of fun. I mean, I live for these moments where we have a little epiphany on channel live, and we had one while playing Murder on Mount Mortimer, and it was pretty fun to discuss it. I'm thankful for the Patreon supporters of this channel. Just got a new one this weekend. I get about one new Patreon person per month, which is fine. It's up to $105 a month. That is no small amount for me. All the ads are turned off on YouTube. There's no money being made on YouTube. In fact, YouTube keeps pushing me to turn on ads. Every time I do a video now, there's a big banner that says, do you want to turn on mid-roll ads, which I guess is something where they run the ads in the middle of the live stream. I don't understand how that's even legal, but anyway, the Patreon supporters help pay for the games that I buy for this channel, since we're not getting any free games. I don't want the free games. I don't want to have any bias or any uncomfortable feelings with developers. So that makes a huge difference. I just went and backed the Dark Quarter. I bought a third-party pledge because I failed to back it. At least I hope I failed to back it. Otherwise, I'll have 2 copies. And we'll be playing that on the channel. And we've been playing this little weird, dark, creepy game called 50 Clues late at night. I'll probably finish up the 3rd box of that on Monday. The only thing I've been slacking on is catching up with reviews, and I'm going to try to do that in the next weeks. I will be around on the channel quite a bit in December. In fact, I'll have enough time that I think we may try to do a little Christmas marathon, 2 weeks of lots of live streaming and gaming. I'm hoping we will be able to finally get through Razorhurst Blood Alley, which I've been looking forward to, and maybe some other things. We've got some special Christmas longer games. We'll see what we can do. And I will try to put out a new episode of Tabletop Mystery Game News for next weekend. I think maybe we'll do that on Saturday, and maybe I'll finally get around to recording some holiday gift buying recommendations of mystery games. Corey was just asking me a couple days ago, could I recommend some really good hard games? And so I think we've got enough of some experience here that we can make some reasonable suggestions about gifts to get people who might be interested in mystery games, etc. Let me see what the chat answers. Marlene says, friends coming for dinner and a movie. That's a nice tradition. Matt is working on a new improv case. For those of you who weren't here on the channel, when we played Matt's improv Sherlock Holmes case, that was a highlight of this channel, a very special experience. He basically wrote a case live over the course of a month and a half, like Dear Holmes, but interactive, because we could write back. It was really a special experience, and maybe we'll get something similar again out of Matt, although now with the AI, we'll soon get to a point where the AI can write these custom cases, but Matt's got a window of opportunity. Debbie says the improv case was awesome. Marlene's making ice cream. What flavors of ice cream are you making, Marlene? I make ice cream all the time here. My favorite flavors are mint Oreo, coffee, vanilla, and black cherry. And and Marlene are saying nice things about the channel, which I appreciate. Vanilla French custard. My wife loves vanilla. French custard just meaning you cook the eggs. All the ice cream I make does have cooked eggs. Or is there something special about it being custard? Matt says, this will be my last case before I'm replaced by AI. I'm not sure we're going to get 100% replaced by AI, but I've had a real wake-up call with the AI. Let me just give a little brief sidebar here about AI. I went to graduate school for neural networks and AI. I sort of got out of it right when it's taken off. But I've been sort of skeptical about the AI coding stuff. And then this last 2 weeks, I've been working on New York Noir, the mystery game that I've been working on for 2 years now almost. And I've spent the last 2 weeks, almost all of my free time, the last week or two, redoing the code that makes the directories for New York Noir, which are hundreds of pages long and have to look like a phone book, etc. And there's a whole long story. I posted on Board Game Geek about this little episode, if you're curious, on the New York Noir game section. Anyway, point is, I'm using LaTeX, which is a typesetting layout language tool that was written in the 70s, is still in use. And it is a very obtuse, obscure, convoluted thing to write code in with some really weird stuff about it. And you can get onto ChatGPT now and say, give me an example line, a one-liner of how to do this weird thing in LaTeX. And it'll pop you out a fully commented little tiny snippet of code using some esoteric library package that only a handful of people have ever used. And it's literally saving you maybe 3 hours of searching and trial and error. You can I've literally saved dozens of hours, not by it generating huge amounts of code, but by figuring out the very weird esoteric details of how to write one line of code. That if I had to do that myself, I'd have to do search after search, read package documentation, try to filter through tons of irrelevant results. It's really, for some things, it's clear how remarkable a time saver it is. Kind of shocking how good it is. Melissa says, having played one the other night that I think was AI, I don't think you can be replaced, Matt. It was boring and way too easy. Well, it's still going to require human intervention for a while. But Rob has been working on an AI. Rob, in the Discord for Co-op for Two, is sort of the AI person who researches these things and experiments with them. And he's been experimenting with taking Mugbook, one of the old murder mystery games we've played, and using the AI to sort of buff it up and elaborate stuff. And so I think that may be the sweet spot for a while now. Human assisted writing. A human writes something and tells the AI, polish it up and elaborate it or expand it, etc. We'll see. Okay. So for those of you tuning in who expected us to be playing Dear Holmes, you're probably wondering where this is going. All right, let's get started. The poison pen. All right, so should we do a little recap? Last session we played, there was no official name. I do believe that is the official name of this case, the poison pen. And what have we got? A friend of Sherlock Holmes from his school days has written him asking for help. He's actually living in America now. He's moved from our client, that is, has moved from England to America, in part to escape his bad reputation. Now, Watson has summarized what we're expected to solve over the course of these 3 cases. How did Arden learn of the writer's past embarrassment? Who has the most to gain from repeating the accusations? And is there more to the case than rival suitors? So that's what we've got. We've got this person who's moved to America for a new life, and someone has written a letter to his father-in-law. Sorry, not father-in-law, to the father of the woman who he's trying to woo, revealing something about his past and threatening to ruin his life. Okay, so this guy who's writing is Watson's writing on his behalf, but let's see the case he basically lays out. He says, remember in my school days, I was accused of stealing money. And remember, you helped defend me. Well, I need your help again about these same charges. He's wooing this girl. He's a suitor of Hendrika Arden, otherwise known as Henny. And he's hasn't fully proposed to her, but he's interested in it. And he's described some other suitors. And he names 3 of them, Robert Bonner, Carl Dempwolf, and Clarence Gray. They're all competing. He gives us a background of each of them. Maybe we can go through that in a second. But he's basically telling us how things are going well for him. He's been in Maryland for 2 years after romping around America for a while, and he thinks he's found a good life. He's working as a banker. And then all of a sudden, he gets a call at his work from the father of the woman that he's been pursuing. He says, come over, I need to talk to you right away. When he gets there, the father slaps him in the face, calls him a damnable villain, and says, never speak to my daughter again, or the rest of the bank's going to know what kind of man you are. And that's when he says, I couldn't get him to show me the letter, but I know what this is about. This is about what happened in England when I was a kid, which you know about. And he says, you'll remember this incident, hopefully, where I was accused of stealing, but it was really another schoolboy named Hunter, and you were the one that proved I was innocent, but my reputation never survived. People still thought I did it. And by the end of my senior year, I had a bad reputation, so I had to leave England. So he leaves England. He's been here for 6 years. And now he's a clerk in a small savings bank. And he says, I need you to do 2 things. I need you to stand up for me, if you would. Tell them that these rumors of what happened in my youth are not true, to preserve my reputation. And maybe you can figure out who sent this letter to the father. Sorry if I didn't mention that. The reason the father calls him in and slaps him is because he's gotten a letter talking about our guy, Fletcher. And he says, so stand up for my reputation, but also figure out if one of these other suitors is doing it to kill off my chances so he can get with this woman. All right, so let us look at the 3 suitors that he thinks, and then I'll recap what the things we observed. So 3 suitors. One is sort of a big farm kid, hulking bronze idol of a man, and he is the son of neighbors of the woman who the girl's family, Henny's family, owns a big farm that makes lots of money, and Robert is the son of neighbors who also have a farm, and if they get married, they'll merge the farms and there'll be a real powerful farming business. And then we've got Carl Dempwolf, who's a learned newspaper writer, and we're told, dresses and sounds like an Englishman. There's something terribly familiar about him. So a little hint, maybe is he related to the person that really did the crime as a kid years ago. We're told his name was Hunter, so we're thinking, maybe there's some revenge thing going on. And then we've got one more suitor, Clarence Gray, who he doesn't hear much about. No one knows what he really does for a living, but he's got a real sense of humor, and obviously Henny talks about him and likes him. So those are the three people. Okay, so what were our observations of after reading this letter? Not too many clues to go on, but a couple. One is obviously we picked up this little thing that seems to be hinting that why is there something familiar about him? Is it because this kid is related to the kid that really stole the money? Where do we hear about Hunter? Did I skip over that page? Hunter was the kid who really did it. I guess it's told in odd order. We don't hear about Hunter later. Here's the case from his past. Schoolboy named Hunter, who you proved was responsible for the theft. Hunter gets kicked out of school. So one obvious idea that the letter seems to be nudging us towards is the idea that this person who's got kicked out of school for stealing and tried to blame Froggy Fletcher wants revenge, and maybe he's one of the suitors or something. But I think the main clue we picked up on when we're reading is that it doesn't seem to us like Fletcher's conclusion is correct. Fletcher gets called by the father, who slaps him in the face, calls him a damnable villain, says, if you ever talk to my daughter again, the bank will know what sort of man you are. And then he says, Fletcher, who's writing to us, says, he's normally such a nice guy. How did he get so angry? I've never seen him so filled with rage. And then he says, it was some time before I could ascertain the reason for his behavior. An anonymous letter had been received, which I must assume, based on his remarks, repeated the same lies that dogged me through my years of school. Now, when we thought about it a little more after reading this letter, we thought, that doesn't seem right. He was accused of stealing a little bit of money in his high school, college days. That I can see why that would give someone a bad reputation, and especially be hard for a banker. You know, you wouldn't want a banker who relies on trust to be known to be stealing when he was a kid. But it doesn't comport with this striking him in the face and calling someone a damnable villain. So our first real observation is we don't think this letter is about the stealing. He did get an anonymous letter, which has revealed stuff about him, but it seems more likely that it's filled with some other lie. Now, we have heard, before I say the word lie, we have heard Froggy Fletcher describe his time in America, and he says, after a number of false starts occasioned by too many adventures and not enough experience, I finally settled to a new life in Maryland. So we know he had some misadventures in America, and he obviously doesn't know that he's done something terrible, but there's always a possibility that he's wronged someone in some way that made an enemy that has nothing to do with his previous youth, or that someone has dug up something and is using it against him, something maybe he doesn't even know about, true or false. I didn't mention this. This was the excerpt. So he wonders at some point, how could someone have discovered his past, which he is obviously worried about when he was a kid and was accused of stealing. And he says, well, there was this story in the Times 20 years ago about the theft from the school. Doesn't mention any names of anyone. And he thinks, is it possible someone found this? And at some point I said, well, maybe it's not that someone dug this up on us. Like, what if one of his past suitors tried to dig up dirt on him and found that, but then his name isn't mentioned, so that seems implausible. But then I said, well, it's not that hard to imagine that part of it. Like, we were thinking, does that mean one of these people, like if you're making a movie, maybe one of the suitors turns out to be, what if one of the suitors that seemed familiar is the guy that he accused, that he put the blame on eventually? And I said, well, maybe it could be something simpler than that. One of the suitors is an international newspaper guy. You could imagine a case where this guy is talking to his friends overseas and says, there's this guy here. He's trying to win the heart of the girl I love, and I don't trust him. What can you find on him? And maybe one of his newspaper contacts went to school with him and says, hey, I know that kid. He was for 4 years. It was all the rage that he had stolen. So even if they're not related, someone could have found out about it. But the absolute key thing for us is that this damnable villain slap in the face doesn't seem like it matches his past. So I don't think it has anything to do with it. Let's see. I think we all agree on that. And it says, I don't know. Losing your honor between gentlemen was a very serious business. He had to change continents because of it. I mean, what he says is he had trouble getting a job and he decided he needed to restart his life. I'm not sure how much it was really affecting him. The way question 1 is phrased really does suggest the anonymous letter was about him stealing as a kid. Let's see what the questions were. So how did Arden, that's the father, learn of the writer's past embarrassment? Well, you're right. That does sound like it is assuming that this is about that. We're going to find out, though. And it says, I guess the stealing meant he supposedly lost his honor. That's why he couldn't court the girl anymore. He would dishonor her by association. I don't think the letter was about the stealing accusation. Must have been of something worse. Arlene agrees with Rob. You guys, you're really agreeing with me. I think I was the one who suggested this originally, but maybe not. But yeah. Let's see. Being a banker, I would guess something recent would have to do with something that happened in the area. If it's revenge, maybe the person spiced up the story, made it more close in time. That's an interesting idea. Someone maybe exaggerated the case. Interesting. Could he have an illegitimate child he didn't know about? That sort of went to my mind when you could imagine, he says he had these misadventures in America before he settled down. You could imagine a scenario where he's fathered an illegitimate child and doesn't even know it. And that woman is following him and writing this letter, right? You could imagine he has an affair with some woman. She gets pregnant. He doesn't even know it. And he leaves her. And then she tracks him down, feels like he left her because she got pregnant, even though he doesn't know it, and is now trying to ruin his possibility to get married to someone else. We know he doesn't know it because he's being quite open about this stuff. And this is the only thing he can think of could be in that letter. So he obviously doesn't think he's done anything worse. Suppose he had an affair with a woman, abandoned her, leaving her pregnant. I could understand the father's anger. Absolutely. Although, as I say, I don't think it's feasible that he knowingly left a woman pregnant in some other place. If he had, he would surely suspect that this letter could be about that. The fact when he isn't told what the letter is, he knows what it's about. And he knows it's about his childhood stealing. A false accusation of stealing means he knows he didn't leave some woman pregnant somewhere. He doesn't know that he left some woman, but it could still be the case that he doesn't know it. Melissa says, could he also be a narcissist and does stuff he doesn't think is wrong and leaves when things get too hot for him? I really don't think so. All right, we'll see. All right, well, let's open up our letter then. Oops, what am I doing? Let's get started. It's 30 minutes in. We haven't even started reading the next letter yet. That's the whole foundation of this channel, is drawing things out and making them take longer than they otherwise would. Okay. 3 sheets of paper. Who is writing us? MMB. Deputy Manager Frederick Dawthorne Fletcher. This is the bank. The bank is writing us? Ernest Spaulding, President, MMB, West Lafayette Street, Baltimore, Maryland. This is from the bank. What's up down here? How is that? That's how you... Is that text? What is that? What kind of letterhead is that? Just dots, huh? Okay. 3 dots at a time. Was there a special key for that on the typewriter? Not seen that before. Okay. Obviously, Holmes has written this guy and asked for something. My dear Holmes, I thank you for your speedy and beneficent reply, though I should begin with an apology. With regard to Hunter and Henny's suitors, you are correct. I want to make sure I'm not reading some wrong letter. One of these days, I'm going to make some terrible mistake on this channel and spoil the whole thing. With regard to Hunter and Henny's suitors, you are correct. It appears that in my fervor I spoke mistakenly. In the closing of my previous letter, after referring to Henny's suitors, I, concentrating on the notion of my rivals, proceeded to list Hunter alongside the 3 men vying for Henny's attention. This was an error, yet I recently uncovered something that suggested to me that my old adversary might truly be involved in my current ordeal. For that reason, your missive has thrown me into a turmoil. I must ask, are you absolutely certain of the information you've found? Okay, so this is Froggy Fletcher writing to us again. Okay, he's writing to us on the letterhead of his bank now. So I guess Holmes has agreed to take the case. Okay, I'm a little thrown off by the way this is starting here, but he's basically saying, we're not seeing the other side of this communication. So he's writing back to Holmes, following up. And he says, yes, I did list Hunter among the 3 men because maybe he's causing this trouble. Okay, he says, no, I won't comment anymore. I must ask, are you absolutely certain of the information you found? You mentioned that Hunter died of apoplexy 2 years ago. Is there any chance you could have found information regarding the death of a different Hunter? Or that might Hunter have staged his death and, like me, escaped his past? Please do not think I've gone mad. I will explain my theory. Some days after I first wrote to you on the 30th of January, I made a serendipitous discovery. I was doing the favor of a colleague, collecting my neighbor's newly repaired chair from a shop nearby, Grady's. And on this minor journey, I had a curious conversation with the shop owner, Benjamin Yards Grady, and his associate, Dennis. When I entered, Mr. Grady was sat behind a counter reading a mystery novel. So tall was the man that I didn't realize he was seated until he stood up to welcome me. "Hello," he said quietly, through a thick gray and white beard. "What can I do for you?" I informed him I was there on behalf of my neighbor, Miss Emerson, and he retreated to the back of his shop to fetch her furniture. As he did so, a woodworker emerged from the other end of the shop and introduced himself. "Dennis Francis Meany. I did most of the work on Miss Emerson's chair. Mahogany, real nice piece. I understand why she'd want it fixed up. So is Carl away somewhere, or are you the new errand boy?" I was so shocked to hear that name that I immediately responded, Carl Dempwolf? Dennis corrected me. Carl Haring, Mrs. Haring's boy, with the orange hair. I said, ah, and let the man go on unbothered by the question until he inadvertently led me to my theory. Among many other details, Dennis informed me that he was a retired university professor of the physical sciences, and prior to that, he had been a student of theology, fascinated by foreign languages. His point, the name Dempwolf, is a curious one of German origin, Demp, borrowed from a word that means strangle, and wolf, well, borrowed from wolf. In plain terms, Dempwolf means hunter. My eyes grew wide on hearing those words. Still, I refrained from explaining my amazement to the man. I simply waited for Mr. Grady to emerge with Miss Emerson's chair, left to return it to her, and set out to ponder the thought which is even more unbelievable now than it was then. Could my childhood nemesis, Hunter, be living under the guise of a secret identity? I have found that it's very easy to vanish should one have sufficient cause and determination. Hunter would have certainly had enough family money to fund any new life, and Carl Dempwolf's own life is something of a puzzle. Why, last May he became so obsessed digging in some decades-old story he found that he turned up a day late for Henny's birthday celebration. I question whether he's even interested in her, or is merely, as Henny would say, chasing some story. Perhaps there is some scandal attached to the Ardens I should know of. I'm in a mess, Holmes. I find myself questioning everything and everyone. Take Gray, for example. Despite everything I've been told, I've never seen him so much as steal a glance at Henny. He never dances except with Mama Arden. He never makes small talk except with Robert Bonner. Papa Arden watches him like a hawk. It's all very strange. In answer to your other question, no, I have never spoken of the theft to Henny or any of my associates. When I speak about my life and family back in England, it's always in the most general of terms. As the French expression goes, il faut laver son linge sale en famille. One should wash one's dirty linen at home. I know you have your own way of working, so I will force myself to stop engaging in wild speculation and wait on your discoveries. Until then, I confess that I find it increasingly difficult to complete my work at the bank. Since I last wrote to you, I have endured two rather interesting conferences, one with Arden and another with Robert Bonner's father, Manfred Bonner. I hadn't spoken to Arden or Henny since that terrible interview on the 17th of January. However, 2 days ago, my manager was absent, and all of his appointments fell to me, including one with Arden. He had promised not to speak to the bank until I had the opportunity to show him proof positive of my innocence, and so far he had kept his word, but my nerves were racked. As the day of the appointment approached, I began to feel physically ill. I contemplated finding a way out of the meeting. I reasoned that my manager could deal with it when he returned. Finally, though, I decided to go through with it, because doing otherwise would have implied my guilt. We sat there, we two, in that bright, empty office like cats, standing off against one another, hairs on our necks bristling, refusing to make eye contact. The farmer sat across the desk from me, seemingly examining the pattern on his shirt, answering each of my queries with a curt yes or no. Then we came to it, the request for an extension on his loan, which my manager had already declined. With so many demands on it, the bank's official position is to give preference to smaller loans, the argument being that we can help more families that way. Truth is more complex. My manager would never admit it, but with so many loans outstanding, we cannot afford to have one of our largest customers default. To be clear, Arden's ranch is in better standing financially than most hereabouts. His losses over the winter of '86 were large, but thanks to Madame Arden's carefully cultivated business connections, his credit in Maryland is still good. My manager felt he had no need for additional funds. My manager felt he had no need for additional funds from the bank to buy new stock. Telling him so had become my problem. Arden took the news in silence, and I thought that would be the end of it. Then he let out a terrible, hollow little laugh. It is strange, is it not, Mr. Hawthorne Fletcher, that here you sit, a thief and liar, deciding the fate of my family and my business, a business that has been built up through 3 generations with the sweat from honest toil. The sort of toil, sir, I'll vouch you and your kind know nothing of. I should not be surprised that a thief like you would think nothing of taking the bread from my table, but to imperil my daughter's future is beyond contempt. I wonder, would your answer be the same if I took the letter that is resting in my jacket pocket and deposited it on your manager's desk? Mr. Holmes, you cannot imagine how I felt at that moment. For a second, I felt the room spin. I was untethered like a shipwrecked sailor in the eye of a storm, clinging to my desk as though it were the only scrappy piece of flotsam keeping my head above the waves. Did he mean what he said? Would he do as he had threatened? For a moment, all I could do was stare at him, wide-eyed. Here was a man who I'd hoped to call father. It seemed incredible. Worse than that, I found myself re-examining my every interaction with the man through the dark lens of doubt. Finally, I came to myself. No, it would not do to think such things. It was all the fault of that damned Hunter and those damned postal orders. I told Arden coldly that if he wished to break his word and show the letter to my manager before I'd had the chance to clear myself, then he was at liberty to do so. Regardless, the bank's position would not change. He looked a little abashed at that. For the first time during the interview, he looked up at me, locked eyes, you might say. I'd seen cattlemen appraising a steer in much the same way, and it wasn't a comfortable experience. He said nothing, placed the infamous letter before me, and left in short order. But I had no time to reflect on this turn of events, for my next appointment was with Manfred Bonner. Bonner's interest was due. I knew he didn't have the funds, and I expected the interview to be strained. What happened was quite the opposite. Manfred Bonner breezed into my office like a man who hadn't a care in the world. Like his son, Bonner is a big man with the sort of confidence that brings. He and Arden make a curious duo, the one so quietly spoken and tightly wound, the other loud and full of passion. He sat there, his long legs stretched out, his sunburnt features and large eyes creased into a beatific smile. "Well, boy," he said, banging the desk enthusiastically, "it's damn good of you to see me, all things considered. I'm not sure I'd be man enough." I wanted to tell him that I hadn't the faintest idea what he was talking about, but he rattled on, quite unaware of my confusion. "I was beginning to think that dog wouldn't hunt, but he surprised me in the end. And what with the Gray affair, everything will be on the up for Farm Bonner from now on. I don't know how long these here things take to arrange. That's for the ladies to sort out. There'll be no unnecessary delays, that's for damn sure. My balance may be due in 2 months, but I've a mind that you'll have every cent owed long before then. For you don't let family fail. Yes, sir, Farm Bonner is on the up and set to be bigger than ever. I didn't know what to say except thank him for his assurances and watch him leave, whistling all the way to the street door. That was on the third Friday. Haven't heard a word from him since then. You also inquired in your letter about the Ardens and my relationship to them. I will endeavor to give you a proper understanding. Baltimore is a city of almost 400,000 souls. It's a place that embraces modernity, but away from the great iron and glass factories and the grand houses, you will still find settlements that remind one of the old Wild West, or at least its shadow. Farms and ranches, such as those owned by the Ardens and Bonners, circle the city, providing everything necessary to feed and water the growing population. And those properties are always in need of funds, often in debt until their investment can be realized at market. In fact, it was in relation to a loan that I first met Henny's father in January of '87. Of late, we'd had a series of very mild winters and hot, dry summers. Then, in the fall of 1886, the weather suddenly changed. Snow was coming down as early as November, and the new year brought us pain in lieu of the good tidings we expect of the holidays. The storm in January was the worst that locals have seen in 35 years. The Patapsco River here in Baltimore was choked with ice. Telegraph wires snapped in the cold. Trains and wagons were unable to get through the drifts. Nearly an inch of snow fell every hour for almost 16 hours straight. I myself slept at the bank, for the streets were too treacherous to attempt the walk to my boarding house. Even with the fire stacked high and rugs thrown around my shoulders, I spent the evening blue with cold. Crops were ruined, but it was the cattle that took the brunt of it. Locals still talk of starving animals staggering from homestead to homestead in their desperate search for food. The hot summer had left but meager supplies of grass, you see, and that was covered in thick ice. When the melt finally came, dead animals stretched out to the horizon. Many of the carcasses were so decayed or mauled by wild animals that they were useless. Those that could be salvaged had to be sold quickly and cheaply. Despite their size, it was no surprise that both the Arden and Bonner ranches struggled that winter. Thus I met both of the men rather frequently during those desperate months, such that our business dealings quickly took the form of friendship. I shared the Ardens' table often, and it was as things started warming up between myself and Henny that I asked to be removed from the Ardens' account. I felt that my impartiality might become compromised, and my manager had agreed. Arden bristled when I broached the matter. "Why," he said with a flush, "anyone would think that I'd set Henny after you." My impression of the man and his family follows. It is possible in this bold new nation to have dirt under your fingernails and still be a gentleman. Such is the case of Adrian Arden. I have noted that his people are Dutch, and the combination of Dutch egalitarianism and Southern sense of fair play have fashioned a most remarkable person. The farm belongs to his wife, Clementine, though he feels no shame in this. Rather, he works even harder to prove his worth, never afraid to pitch in when dirty work needs doing. I mentioned previously how easy his manner was. This I learned from the first day we met, and on that very day in January he invited me to his home. This, too, was when I met his only child, Henny. Clementine is an equally remarkable woman with an intensity to her that can be unnerving. I recall the day I met her. She looked at me across the dining table, her cool green eyes searching mine, and she asked, "And what do you bring to Farm Arden, Mr. Hawthorne Fletcher?" It was such an odd question, I wasn't sure how to respond, so I said something about a banker's priority being to help customers plan for the future. "Our future is in the land," she replied, "and I will do whatever is necessary to protect it. As long as you feel the same way, you're always welcome at our table." Her attitude should have been no surprise, for farming is a perilous occupation. Mr. Arden was not wrong when he noted that a banker would be a handy thing to have in the family, but how things have changed. Mr. Holmes, do you see anything in all this that might help explain how and why my past has been summoned to haunt me? I am particularly hopeful that you may be able to throw some light on my theory regarding Dempwolf and Hunter. I understand it could easily seem as if I'm holding on to a grudge, and I will confess that there were many times during my youth when I dearly wished the worst upon Hunter. I hated him then with the sort of passion known only by a child who has been wronged. Still, time passes. I appreciate now that he was not an evil boy, merely one who had been too indulged, one who had been brought up to believe that the status he enjoyed afforded him all the privileges and none of the responsibilities. I give the man little thought nowadays, but the circumstances seem so perfectly suspicious. Please let me know your thoughts on this as soon as you're able. I fear the distance between Henny and myself grows by miles with each and every passing minute. Yours faithfully, Froggy Fletcher. A final note, I will transcribe the letter for you here. Here we go. This is what we've been waiting for. Sir, Hawthorne Fletcher is a common sneak thief. The man is known for stealing cash postal orders of the sum £3 17 shillings 6 from pupils of a school. The villain fled to these here states before he could be taken to law. Think on what sort of man like that would make. Before you ruin Henny and yourself, you and the bank will find that once a thief, always a thief. I don't know what to make of Arden's decisions to finally share it with me, but of his decision to finally share it with me, but perhaps he feels some shame about his earlier behavior. The letter was written on cheap wood pulp paper that's made in great quantities hereabouts. A business or gentleman would never use it, but almost everyone else does. Naturally, the writer wasn't so foolish as to use his own hand. The words were made up from clipped newsprint, then typed, the type likely taken from The Sun, which is the largest circulation newspaper in these parts. Arden noted that it had been folded and slipped under his door. None of the family or staff saw who delivered it, but noticed the wording. Well, it seems we were wrong about the letter. This short little snippet is enough to have him get slapped in the face and called a villain. Interesting. I mean, before we get into it about the writing style and what it tells us, I do want to mention a real long shot just to be clear about it. He meets with Arden. Arden puts the letter on his desk. So I wonder what your answer would be if I took the letters in my pocket to put on your manager's desk. Okay. So he says, I can't give you a loan. You can give it, if you want to break your word and give the manager the letter, that's up to you. Okay. So then I just want to mention this one little crazy possibility. Arden gets up to leave. He said nothing, placed the infamous letter before me, and left in short order. But I had no time to reflect on it, his next appointment with Bam. So the letter's sitting on his desk. He hasn't read it yet. Then Manfred Bonner comes in, who's in a great mood. This is the neighbor, the father of the neighbor boy. And he's obviously in a great mood because his son is, obviously, it looks like, Henny has agreed to marry his son. or at least he thinks so. So as far as he's concerned, his son is marrying Henny, and all his finances are going to be in great shape. So the really ridiculous long shot I wanted to mention is the possibility that this guy has taken the letter and swapped it. But that seems completely implausible. He'd have to know that it was going to be there, know that he'd have access to it. It's ridiculous. So I think the only conclusion is that this really is the letter that someone deposited at the Arden house, and this is really upset a guy. Anna was right. The insult to the honor of a thief was enough to make the guy freak out. All right, so what do we notice? He even says, notice the wording. So there's some things that jump out. I mean, there's a couple of terms that might be used by one person or another, like sneak thief is a very specific term that a dialect term that some people would know and other people wouldn't. It definitely has got some sort of slang stuff that you wouldn't expect a learned businessman to use. He says, think on what sort of son a man like that would make. He uses the word villain again, the same word the father used. He knows the exact amount. That's the exact amount that was in the paper in the first letter. So that's a very specific amount. It's exactly the amount mentioned in the Times article. And in fact, he drops the school. He doesn't specify the school name as well and uses the same two hyphens where the article anonymized the school name. From pupils of blank school, he says, he uses the same exact phrase here. Look at this. Is suspected of stealing cash and postal orders of the sum from pupils of blank school. Suspected of stealing cash and postal orders of the sum of £3 17/16. Known for stealing. Okay, different phrasing of the sentence, but then he says cash postal orders of the sum £3 7/16 from pupils of the blank school. It's a direct word for word second half of the newspaper article sentence. And then here's the slang he used. The villain fled to these here states. And states is capitalized before he could be taken to law. So, but could it be someone faking that kind of language to throw? Like if this is a newspaper guy, a academic skilled writer, who's writing this, he might purposely write it to sound like an old country person. All right, let's see what the chat has noticed. Melissa says conversion calculator indicates the amount is about 11 days of wages. It also refers to Henny by name instead of Miss Arden, which suggests someone familiar with her. Okay, that's a good catch. That's actually not a bad catch. Newspaper article. Before you ruin Henny and yourself, that does suggest someone quite familiar with the daughter to call her Henny. So clearly this is someone who knows the family well, lives in town, etc. It's also interesting because he said in the first letter that none of them have declared their intentions. So I'm not sure. Is it odd that this person is already talking about him being a son? Where does he say he didn't declare his intentions? I mean, they're all vying for her hand. I guess they all know that. But several of us suitors vying for her hand. Somewhere, though, he says, I looked forward to proposing marriage. She's the dearest thing. Wonder, is there anything odd about someone talking about? He does say, I had thrown my hat into the ring. None of us has yet declared our intentions openly. We are all so besotted we daren't risk a no. But now in this letter, the Bonners obviously have, and she seems to agree. And then there's the other story here. His crazy thought that Hunter could be one of the men because Dempwolf translates to some bizarre matchup with the word hunter. Let me see. So he comes up with this crazy theory because he runs into this shop. Let me just find that part. Yes. Okay. So the shopkeep says when he's bringing the furniture, he says, I do most of the work. Is Carl away? And he says, are you talking about Carl Dempwolf? And he says, Carl Herring, Mrs. Herring's boy with the orange hair. I see. Okay. So it's not the same person he's talking about. I was thinking, are we learning that Dempwolf has no money and he's working as a delivery boy? But no. He's talking about someone else, but the conversation got to the history of Dempwolf. All right. This doesn't seem relevant at all. It's just complete. Our guy is only fixated on his past with Hunter. And here we're told that Hunter has died. Holmes has researched it, and the boy has died. Now, before we jump to the sealed conclusion that obviously it's not to do with his past stealing money and he's crazy for thinking Hunter, we should make a note of one thing. Holmes tells him Hunter died. Therefore, it can't be Hunter who's getting revenge on him. But you could look at it another way, right? Hunter died of apoplexy 2 years ago. Okay. Well, 2 years ago is not that long ago. You could imagine a scenario where Hunter had felt like his life had been ruined by being accused of stealing the money. Seems like Holmes was probably couldn't be wrong that Hunter did it, so probably Hunter really did do it. But you could imagine a scenario where we would think, why would this guy Hunter go to all this trouble of getting revenge on him? But what if Hunter's wife, kid, blames our guy for accusing his father of stealing the money as a kid and feels like his father's life was ruined by this accusation of thievery, and so wants revenge on him. But I think, as the channel has pointed out, the letter was left under the door and it's written with such familiarity. It's not going to be written by any relative of Hunter after revenge. So this does seem like it could be one of the suitors trying to get rid of him. Or I guess we have to entertain the idea that the father, you could imagine a scenario where the father is trying to blackmail him. But I don't think the father, like the father said, I've got this letter. What if I show it to your manager? Now, will you give me a loan? What he do as he had threatened? But doesn't seem like it's going to be very good blackmail. I mean, if this letter is enough to ruin our guy Fletcher's chances with Henny, then his theory all along is a sound one, that one of the suitors found this information and is getting rid of him as a suitor, getting rid of a rival. I mean, Fletcher's theory, which we thought was far-fetched, that someone dug up this past and is using it against him, is completely sound now. He's right. That rumor from his past is ruining his chances. Then it just becomes a matter of who found this information. What is the Gray affair that Bonner mentioned? Was that in the first letter? I suspect it's one of the Bonners that wrote it, probably using cutouts from the newspaper article. We still need to explain how the Bonners know he was the unnamed pupil. That's right. Why would the father believe accusations in some short random letter without any sort of evidence? He was 12 years old. He could have been in college. I didn't quite follow what school this was. I guess Bonner could be in league with Gray, who doesn't really seem that interested in Henny. It could be Gray who found out about Fletcher's past. That's the newspaper guy. If the father were trying to blackmail him, why give him the letter? It's true. That seems like giving him the original of the letter wouldn't make sense if you're trying to blackmail him. Why is the letter anonymous? Why not just accuse him openly? I mean, if you were the rival, you probably wouldn't want your name on this letter. It might come across as trying to be too needy and greedy. Okay, the Gray affair. Let's look at that. There was some question in the channel. Let me see if I can find that. And there's also a weird thing with the wife. Clementine actually owns the farm, but the father is a very hard worker, invited to the home. She says, I recall when I met her, she says, what do you bring to Farm Arden? She says, our future is in the land. I will do whatever is necessary to protect it. As long as you feel the same way, you're always welcome. Is it possible, like, the wife has left this note to get rid of him because she doesn't feel he's good enough or something? She doesn't feel like he's going to. She wants Henny to marry the other guy, maybe. It would still just be a question of how did they find out about it. But okay, where is the part about the Gray affair? Where was it mentioned? I mean, Gray is one of the other suitors. All right. Whoever in the chat was talking about some Gray affair in this letter, can you please give me more information about where to find it? Clarence Gray. This is the person who's 10 years older, but he's funny and she likes his humor. It is a little odd that he's talking again about how no one seems to be interested. The other men that are courting her aren't really interested in her. I can't remember where he mentions that again. Oh, here's the Gray affair. Okay, let's read now. I wanted to tell him I hadn't the faintest idea he was talking about. He rattled on. I was beginning to think that dog wouldn't hunt. He's talking about whether his son would marry Henny. And he says, I was beginning to think the dog wouldn't hunt. I think he's talking about his son, the dog that wouldn't hunt. But he surprised me in the end. And what with the Gray affair, everything will be on the up. Yeah, what is the Gray affair? Surely they're talking about Clarence Gray, one of the other suitors. But what is this Gray affair he's talking about? That is a very good catch. He's a lawyer, but he doesn't really know what his job is. It does sound like we're hearing a little bit more about Gray, but not told. Like, this is very tempting. Okay, Marlene says she wants to rehear the part about how they give out loans. They were basically saying that the banker says their policy is to give out small loans, but it's really the big businesses they're worried about. Let me put out these away so that I can highlight stuff. I'm going to be happy to reread it. This is our system for not marking up these letters. The first dozen or so, first half dozen letters of Dear Holmes we read, I just wrote all over them. But as you know, I'm trying to get my hands on older letters, and that's why I'm trying to preserve these so that we could trade them. I think Rob has a pretty good hypothesis of what gray affair might mean. Maybe that they've removed that Gray has in some scene off camera has also been removed as a suitor. So I think that's a pretty interesting guess. That sounds kind of right to me. So that would give weight to the idea that someone is getting rid of each of the suitors. Maybe the newspaper guy. The newspaper guy is the one guy who would have connections to find out about people's history. And Rob is suggesting, hey, I think some anonymous person has gotten rid of Carl Gray as well. That's a very interesting idea. Okay. Is there something we should get out of the fact that his son didn't think his son was actually going to pull this off, but the son is doing it? Both of the two banks, two farms considering merging seem to be in some financial trouble though. Like this guy wants to merge his bank because he says you don't let family fail. That sounds like the Bonner Bank farm is in trouble. And here comes the Arden Bank in trouble, desperate for the loan. So should we be thinking about that these farms are not in as good shape as we think? I like the writing of this scene here where he's getting yelled at is very well done. Look at this notion. Look at this mention about Carl Dempwolf digging into a story. Last May, he became so obsessed digging into some decades-old story he found, he turned up a day late. Chasing some story. Is he chasing into his story? Decades-old story. That's describing our story, but it seems so... I guess we're going to have to shake off this idea that it's a trivial story, because obviously it's not, but he must have figured out it was him. Someone figured out it was him. He told us he didn't tell anyone, so no one could have, he didn't tell Henny, etc. Okay, so let's see. What was the part someone was interested in hearing about how loans were given out? Here was the part about how loans were given out. The bank's official position give preference to smaller loans. Truth is more complex. Manager would never admit it, but with lots of loans outstanding, we cannot afford to have one of our largest customers default. So officially, they say, well, we try to favor smaller farms, but unofficially, they don't want to loan more money to the big farms. I don't know. This doesn't really make sense. Maybe it's saying officially we're supposed to favor small farms, but really we favor the big ones. But then they're not giving one to Arden, so I don't really get it. There's been some real reconnection, real trouble internet connecting to the chat for some, not internet, some YouTube issue where it keeps losing connection to the chat. I don't really get it. TJ Moneycut says, if the motive for sabotaging the tutors, Froggy seems a better pick than Bonner for his failing farm, so maybe revenge is more likely. No, I don't think it's revenge. I think actually this was a very good observation. What with the Gray affair, everything will be on the up. Actually, I'm not sure now that this means that he's been running out. But the fact that the Bonner boy is now proceeding makes me think this really is all about getting rid of a rival suitor. So but the suitors in some way, they don't seem that interested. One of them is always just interested in the mother. It's a little weird, don't you think? That the others, isn't it a little weird that the others don't seem that interested in Henny? Clarence Gay rarely is more interested in talking to the mother. And Bonner's father thinks his son won't hunt. In other words, sounds like the son might be gay or not interested in Henny. And then Dempwolf is more concerned with his newspaper job, showing up late, etc. A little weird that these guys are not chasing after Henny so much. Tempelf usually spends the whole night chasing his story, only arrives in time to give the lady his apologies. Is this all about money? Are these suitors all interested in the money in the farm? Not really in Henny? Are they working together to get rid of Fletcher? Hmm. It is very odd that he's not mentioned the name of the school. The paper doesn't mention the name of the school, and this doesn't mention the name of the school. I find that odd. The newspaper doesn't mention it because it doesn't want to get anyone in trouble. Back at the time, right? Back in 72. We're now in 88. I mean, it's been 15 years. In respect for the privacy of the families, they're hiding this. They're not saying the school. But here, they know it's him, but they're still not mentioning the school name. I find that odd. Written on cheap paper, hand delivered. He is lying. Whoever's writing this has fled to the States before he could be taken to law. That's not what happened. So he has exaggerated it to make it look worse for Fletcher. DJ Monikit says, not mentioning the school seems to eliminate the possibility that it is Hunter. He would know the name of the school. Debbie says, the missing name of the school that was common in newspaper articles. That's our point. Our point is it's not strange that the newspaper article doesn't have the name of the school, but the fact that the writer doesn't use the name of the school is odd. It, as DJ says, well, it would suggest it's not Hunter or someone who knows Hunter for revenge. He would know the name of the school, and why not use it to authenticate your claim? Rob says, does anyone else other than Bonner gain anything from removing Froggy and Gray as suitors? If we're right that they really are going to get married, then surely it's Bonner. Wasn't the letter produced using newspaper cuttings? It was probably from the same article. No, it's just it's like a ransom letter. It was produced with random cut letters. It's not actually cut. They haven't actually cut out the article. Macon says it has to be Bonner and Dempwolf in concert. It does make me think we maybe miss this Gray affair. This Gray affair, which we don't know what it is. What if it's not that Gray has been removed as a suitor? What if it's that these three men are working together? The three suitors are actually working in concert to get the money from this farm. And Bonner is going to be the one to marry her. And Dempwolf, the newspaper guy, is digging up the dirt on our interloper here, Fletcher. And Gray is wooing the mother for some reason to get her money. Like, what if all three are doing this? Is it possible that these three men are, well, of mysterious backgrounds, are conspiring? I really wonder what this Gray affair is going to turn out to be. With that Gray affair, everything will be on the up from Farm Bonner. That almost sounds like some affair with Bonner and Gray making some profit. Hmm. Oswald are working together, but I don't see how Dempolf and Gray expect to benefit from it. Yeah, that's a good point. It does seem a little convoluted that they would all be working on it together. Um, Futures in the land will do everything we need to do to protect it, she says. Dempolf wants to be the greatest newspaper man of all time. Very ambitious. He makes her laugh. He's chasing stories. Something familiar about him, he says. Trying to think, is there some possibility that the guy who's interested in the mother is trying to sabotage the marriage of the daughter because he's got some other plans? Hmm. Debbie says, this is a bit of a weird plot so far, not necessarily bad, but weird. Maybe the mother doesn't want Henny to get married and is sabotaging things. I can see that. Maybe Henny doesn't want to get married. I mean, the newspaper guy could dig this up. In one sense, you could imagine a very straightforward theory where the newspaper guy digs it up. But then is he faking the writing to make it sound like he's not an educated man? It's a little weird. All right, I think we may have exhausted today's letter. We'll think more about it. There is a Discord for this channel if you want to come discuss things between cases. Otherwise, we'll see each other next Sunday to read the third and final letter of clues before a solution. It doesn't feel like there's that much to get out of it. It is an interesting story. I am curious to see how it ends, but I don't know how we can solve it on our own. All right. Well, I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Spend some time, whether you celebrate it or not, thinking about what you're grateful for. And I'll see you on the next video.